Welcome back to another tutorial live stream. Today I am going to be showing you how to work your way through a pattern. I chose something extremely simple this time, so this is for super newbies. Like if you've never ever used a pattern before in your entire life and you'd like to learn how. This is the pattern I will be using today. I'm making pants for Freya. This is a closet cosplay challenge, or not closet cosplay, wow. This is a stash challenge cosplay, so I'm only using materials that I already have in my stash. So the materials for the pants happen to have some stretch to it. They're not a stretch knit like this pattern calls for, but they have enough of a stretch that I went up a size and they should fit and be fine. So that's why I chose this pattern. Let me just turn on my dashboard here on my phone. It makes it a little easier to see the chat room sometimes. Alright, so let's do super basic, simple. Pattern companies right here. Simplicity, pattern number 8268. Right here are going to be your list of sizes. Make sure you choose the pattern that has your size in it. A lot of times the patterns, there come as two separate patterns. You've got one for like sizes 0 through 12 and then 12 through 22, or you know, something like that. So make sure that you're grabbing the pattern that is in your size. When you turn it over, there's a whole bunch of information on the back. At the very top, it's going to tell you what type of fabrics that this pattern was created for. Like this pattern here is created for stretch knits. Therefore, if you use non-stretch fabric, it's not going to fit. It's specifically created for stretch knits. So the pattern, or the fabric guide on the pattern is going to tell you what type of fabrics work best for that pattern. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't use something different. But if you're just starting out, I would go with something that's listed here. Now, because it's a stretch, usually stretch patterns will have a stretch guide where it'll show you, okay, here's where your fabric, you'll put your fabric here to here, and then you're going to stretch it, and it should be able to stretch to here in order for this pattern to work for it. I don't work a whole lot with stretch fabrics, so I'm not entirely positive that every single pattern for stretch has this on it. There's also underneath your fabric suggestions, there's going to be measurements. So you're going to want to take your measurements. How to take your measurements will be another video. Maybe that'll just be a YouTube video. But you'll want to take your measurements, and then you're going to choose the size that corresponds with your largest measurement. So if all of your measurements line up with large, but you have one that lines up with an extra large, you're going to make the extra large. And even the same if all of your measurements line up with medium and you have one measurement, like say you got monster hips like I do, and that measurement is lining up with an extra large, you're still going to make that extra large. It's way easier to size a pattern down than it is to build it up. So I always go with the largest measurement, the size that fits your largest measurement. That's applicable. Obviously, if this was listing bust measurements, I'm not going to consider my bust measurement when I'm making pants. That it's not going to fit. If you're doing a dress and it's like an A-line and it flows outward, your hips aren't really going to matter. They're going to, the hip portion of the dress is going to flare out, so that measurement isn't as important as your bust and your waist, you know, etc. Alright, so once you've chosen your size, you're then going to cut out your pattern. I've already cut out the pattern and cut out the fabric because that's long, boring process. So I didn't want you guys to have to sit here and wait while I did that. Something I did is, I'm short, so I had to shorten the leg pattern. So this just kind of shows you how you would shorten a leg pattern, because obviously you see it kind of dips here, and you're not going to cut along that dip. You're just going to kind of grade it down. Excuse me. Okay. So now let's move on to the pattern pieces. All the pattern pieces are going to be numbered. In the instructions that come inside, there will be a list of all of the pattern pieces. Like I said, this is a really simple one, so there's not a whole lot. And because this is a stash challenge for me, I only had enough of this fabric to do the front and the back. I cannot do the pockets, I can't do the waistband, and I can't do the leg bands, which I wouldn't have done the leg bands anyway. So I was only able to cut out the front and the back. That's it. So I'm going to have to use that and make it work. So on your pattern, each one's gonna have the number, and it's going to have these little triangle marks. Let me bring this a little closer so you can see. These are little triangle marks. Those are notches. Usually what I do is I just cut right to the notch through the fabric too, but the fabric's not staying up. You see how I just cut down through the notch? You can cut out those little triangles. I've seen people who sew that way and they cut out the little triangles. All these little notches are for is so that you can line up your fabric. Excuse me, yeah, I've got the hiccups. It's so you can line up your fabric when you're sewing your pieces together. So you don't necessarily have to, excuse me, cut out the triangles. You can just do a little notch so you know where to line up your fabric. There are also circles. This pattern only has large circles. Some patterns will have large and small circles. You do want to transfer those circles onto your, the back side of your fabric when you're making a more complicated outfit. These circles here are probably to help line up the pocket. In fact, I know that's what they're for. And I'm not doing the pocket, so there's really no need for me to do these circles. So I'm not going to transfer these. Okay, so I've got my front and my back notched. Now I'm going to look into the instructions. Also on this lovely general instructions page, there's guides for how to lay out your pattern pieces onto your fabric. I would definitely recommend, unless you bought way more fabric than you possibly could need, I would recommend laying out all of the patterns on your fabric, pinning them all, and making sure everything fits before you start cutting, because you might need to rearrange them in order to get all of the pattern pieces out of the amount. The amount of fabric it tells you that you need, which that's also on here. I'm sorry, I'm like all over the place here today. When you choose your size, underneath the sizes, it'll tell you how much fabric you'll need for that size and all the different types of fabric, because some patterns will have like contrasting fabrics and stuff like that. So it'll tell you how much fabric you need. So if you go by that, that's only giving you enough fabric to get your pattern pieces. So make sure you lay out all of your pattern pieces, go ahead and pin those, and make sure that your fabric is, you have your pattern pieces all arranged and that you're going to have enough fabric how they're arranged. Nothing worse than cutting out your pattern pieces as you go and then finding out that you didn't arrange them very well, and now you're out of fabric and you still have pattern pieces left to cut out. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be super simple. Because like my fabric is stretchy, but it's not super stretchy, and it stretches on the cross grain, so it stretches this way, not this way. I'm not going to worry about using a serger or a zigzag stitch, although these are things you need to use if you're sewing with knit fabric, just depending on how the stretch is going. If your fabric stretches in the direction of your seams, so like if you sew a seam, like this, and your fabric is going to stretch that way, then you need to do either a zigzag, a stretch stitch, or you need a serge those together, so that your stitches don't break. Mine, I mean, it stretches a little bit, but that's not where the stretch is. The stretch for this fabric is definitely this way. I'm not doing any stitches along this way. I will for the waistband, but I'll switch to a zigzag then. Okay, now on to the actual instructions. There's a lot to sewing using a pattern. This is probably why a lot of cosplayers don't bother using patterns, and when I do, I know half the time I don't even read the directions. I just kind of figure it out on my own. Alright, so when you get to the actual instructions, it's going to walk you through how best to sew this together. I recommend, especially if you've never used a pattern before, or 2, you're using a pattern that's more complicated than something you've used previously, I would recommend reading through all of the instructions before you actually start sewing. So read through the instructions completely, then go back to the beginning and reread through them while sewing the article. Even if you don't really understand what it's talking about, for some reason this seems to help. When I made my historically accurate Belle cosplay, I'd never made a robe à la Francais before, and I decided to go ahead and read through the pattern first and then sew the dress. And reading through the pattern, I was like, oh my god, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But then when I went through and I was rereading it as I assembled the pieces, it started to make sense as I was working with the fabric. And I really feel like reading through the pattern one time helped enormously in being able to work through that those directions properly. Okay. Now that we are done, we are going to start actually sewing. So I am going to take the paper pattern off, removing all of the pins. I think I've said previously, some people prefer to use weights. Some people prefer pins. I prefer pins. For me, I feel like weights always slide around how I don't want them to. Hi, what's up, Ollie? I knew you'd be showing up here soon. You always come to my streams. Alright, so you also, if you're making a pattern that calls for more than 2 pieces, you're going to want to write on the fabric using chalk or a fabric pen or fabric crayon thing. You're going to want to write like the pattern number on here. So like this is pattern piece 1, which is the front, and this is pattern piece 2, which is the back. But that'll help you so you're not like, which one is this? It also helps you determine which side or keep track of which side of your fabric is the outer fabric and what side's the inner fabric, especially if the fabric like this looks very similar on both sides. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. I'm good, Ollie. Little one is also good. So I'm just using regular chalk. If you're using really nice fabrics, you might want to test out whatever you're using on like a scrap piece of fabric to make sure it's not going to harm your fabric or see through or stain. Some of the nicer fabrics like this Silk de Pointe and stuff like that can be kind of tricky and finicky. Your little one always sleeps at this time. My streams line up perfectly with his naps. This stream not only will be available on Twitch for the week or two or whatever that Twitch will keep it, but it will also be posted on my YouTube channel. I'm kind of using my YouTube channel as storage for these live streams. So if you come in at the end or you're watching this after the stream has ended and you want to see the whole thing or whatever later, and you don't want the time constraint of Twitch, you can go ahead and check out my YouTube channel. And my username on like everything is all the same. It's all at Anastasia Cosplay, Anna, A-N-N-A. Okay, so I have these taken out, and I have them marked. So the first instruction is to stitch front to back at inner leg seam. This is getting in my way. This is the crotch area, and this is your inner leg. Oh my gosh, it's so not working very well. So that is what you're going to want to do. What this fails to tell you is that you're going to, put right sides together. So I marked on the wrong side of my fabric, which is the inner side of my fabric, the pattern number. So I know that this is my outer and this is my outer. So this is with right sides together. So the first thing I'm going to do is match up my notches. Why did this notch not come through? That's weird. Okay, so I'm going to pin. If you have issues sewing together your seams, try using more pins. The more pins you use, the more stability you have, and also it kind of forces you to go slower because you're going to have to stop and take out the pins. But stretch fabric can sometimes be a little tricky. Now, patterns that you buy are almost always 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is like a whole lot. Let me see if this one says it should say on here somewhere. Yeah, there's like next to your pattern pieces is like a sewing directions. It's like general directions, and it'll tell you stitch 5/8 inch seams unless otherwise noted. So you want to check your patterns and make sure most of them are going to be at a 5/8 inch seam. I used to, when I first started out sewing, I would sew all of my seams at 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch even sometimes when I got better at it, and nothing would fit, and I was like, what the heck, everything would be so big on me. And I was like, I'm following the directions, nothing's fitting, and not only is it not fitting, but it like not only is it too big, but like the fit itself was kind of not good. And then I realized that I was sewing the wrong seam allowance. These were designed with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. As soon as I started sewing in that seam allowance, they were no longer gigantic on me, and they fit closer. You still have to fit a lot of items, but following your seam allowance is a great idea. Oh, thank you, Ollie. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and sew these two pieces. If anybody has any questions at any point during the stream, feel free to ask them. They do not have to be about this pattern in particular. If you have questions about a different pattern, you're more than welcome to ask me about it. Alright, so that one's done. Now we're going to sew this other one. We're going to do the exact same thing with right sides together. We're going to sew the inner leg seam. And we're going to match up notches. Okay, Ollie, see you later. Bye. Also, if you are actually using a knit fabric, you'll want to use a ballpoint needle so that the needle's going between the threads instead of cutting the threads. The regular general needle that you use for sewing is sharp, and so it's going to cut the fabric. And when you do that with knits, this did not line up. I'll redo this. When you do that with knits, that's where you run into trouble with the fabric bunching and just all around not sewing properly. Like, it gets all bunched up and it's just a pain in the butt. Actually, like 90% of the time I had issues while sewing knits previously to actually being like, all right, you know what, let me get on Google and find out what the heck I'm doing wrong and figuring it out. 90% of the time it's because I was using either the wrong stitch or the wrong needle, or sometimes both. So yeah, just be sure that if you're making this pattern and you're using actual knit fabric and you're not like using a different type of fabric like I am, make sure that you get a ballpoint needle to use. Alright, I have this inner seam done, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this up. Right. Okay, next instruction. Alright, with right sides together, pin center seam matching inner leg seams and notches. Stitch. To reinforce seam, stitch again over first stitching. So this is the crotch seam. Not only do they give you written directions, and your written directions here, there's also pictures that go with them, and the pictures are numbered, like here's step 1, here's step 2. So sometimes the words don't really make a lot of sense, but if you look at the picture that goes along with it, you can figure out what they're asking you to do. Like this tells you to do center seam, and you're like, what the hell is this? Which one's the center seam? What are you talking about? And really they're meaning the crotch area. Sew that shit up. Alright, so you're going to do with right sides together. So your seam that you just did is going to go towards the table. And then your other one's going to go on top of that with that seam facing up. Also, if you are using a pattern that is not a stretchy or a knit fabric, you're going to want to press your seams every time you do it. So like we sewed this inner leg seam, you'd want to take that over to your iron and then go ahead and press it. I press my seams open, like I pull them open, and that's how I press them. You can press them to one side, like press them all to the front or all to the back. It doesn't really matter as long as you keep it consistent. I like to keep my seams open though. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the crotch area. I'm going to pin my seams open here. And then I'm going to use any notches that I made and make sure that's all lined up as well as I pin this. It sounds like it is about to storm here. Like there's thunder so bad right now. It's crazy. And also, not only people who are currently watching can ask me questions. If you are watching this later, either here on Twitch or on YouTube when I upload it over there, if while you're watching it you have questions, feel free to leave a comment or shoot me a DM with your question, and I'll try to answer as best I can. Sometimes answering with words is really difficult, but I can show you. But I'll do my best. I've actually thought about having a live stream that was all about patterns, where I can get questions beforehand, and anybody who's watching the live stream, and it'll just be all about patterns, and we can just go over like things about patterns that you find difficult or questions you have, or if you're working through a specific pattern and you have a question, ask, I can help you with that, or I can try. I'm a self-taught seamstress. I did not go to school for this. I probably and very, very most likely do things wrong occasionally. I just kind of use YouTube and to figure things out. That's how I have learned how to do a lot of things. YouTube, or just started doing it and hoping it works. threads. Okay. Moving on to instruction. Oh, I didn't reinforce my seams. I might go back and do that later, depending on how it fits. I'm kind of hoping for a baggy fit, in which case I don't really need to reinforce the seams. All right, 3 is to apply the pockets. We are not doing pockets, or I am not doing pockets because I didn't have enough fabric. That would have been fantastic to do pockets. I love when I have pockets on my cosplay, but that's why I have a husband. No, I'm kidding. I have a husband because I love him, but he does carry all my shit around when I need him to, which is fantastic. So now we are going to sew the outer leg. So we're going to skip 3 and move to 4. So 4 is pin front to back at side seams, matching large dots. Stitch side seams, leaving an opening between large dots. We are actually going to skip that, leave an opening between the large dots, because I'm not doing the pockets. So make sure right sides are together. So you want all your prettiness on the inside, your seams, open seams on the outside towards you. And we are going to stitch this together. And we are going to make sure you match your notches. We are actually almost done. This is a fairly short live stream today. Sometime in the future, hopefully I'll have a project that requires a little bit more complex of a pattern, and then we can work that pattern together. I mostly stream Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Occasionally I'll stream Saturday nights. This is Eastern Standard Time. Occasionally I'll stream Saturday nights, but not always. Those aren't as consistent. I also have 2 Tuesdays in a row where I will not be streaming because my son has to have surgery. So I'm going to be taking care of him for 2 weeks. And he usually goes to daycare on Tuesdays, which is why I'm able to stream at 1. Okay, so I have this first side done. So we're going to go ahead and sew that. first one's done. Let's trim threads, and now we're going to pin this other leg. Match up our notches. One of the best things about making your own cosplays is that you can add pockets to shit. I haven't purchased a whole lot of cosplays, but the ones that I have, like, none of them have pockets. And when I first started, I never added pockets to anything because I would follow the directions exactly how they were, and just a lot of patterns don't call for pockets. And then as the last, like, 2 or 3 years, I've realized how much easier it is to have pockets, and I've started adding pockets wherever I could, even if I had to kind of hide them in the cosplay. Almost done pinning this outer seam, and then we can sew it up. Alright, and we'll go ahead and sew this seam, and then we can move on to, I think we're done with their steps. We can go on to my next step. Okay, that's end there. It is then walks you through how to finish the pocket, and how to do your casings, and then I'm sure how to do the elastic, and yeah, just finishing the whole thing off. I'm not doing any of that, so what I'm gonna do is I do need to create a waistband. I did not have enough fabric to do the casing. I did want to do a casing, so my waistband, what I'm gonna do is just fold the fabric approximately an inch and a half, I think, inch and a quarter, something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it. And do that all the way around. Like I said, I like my seams open, so I'm opening my seams and then pinning. So these are probably going to end up sitting lower on me than they're really supposed to sit, which I'm fine with. I usually wear a corset underneath all of my cosplays just to emphasize my curves. So if these sit a little low, it's fine. I'll have the corset will be there to cover. So that is what that looks like. Now I'm going to sew along the bottom edge here. That way it leaves this open hoop, and that's where I'm going to thread the elastic through. Now because this is not going along with the stretch, I'm actually going to change my stitch to a stretch stitch. You want to look at your manual for your machine to figure out what your stretch stitch is. If all else fails, you can also use a zigzag, but a stretch stitch does work better in my opinion. Almost finished. Okay, so I did not sew all the way around. Let's see if you can see that there's like this opening, this gap right here. That's for me to be able to thread the elastic through. And because I use that stretch stitch, see how my fabric can still stretch. If you don't use a stretch stitch, your threads will snap and or you just won't be able to stretch your fabric that way. Now I have somehow misplaced all of my elastic. I don't know how I managed to do this, but I did. There is an elastic guide that comes with this. Let me grab that real quick. You cut it for the size that you want. For the size of your pattern. For this, I would size it according to your waist or your hips, wherever it's going to be sitting. Like mine's probably going to be sitting down towards my hips a little bit, so I sized it for my hips. But this is the guide, so this is the length that you're going to cut your elastic. You're then going to take a safety pin on one end of the elastic, thread it all the way through, pull the ends out, sew it together, and then it'll go back in. When you sew your elastic, make sure you use a ballpoint needle or your machine, and you are just going to hate life. The elastic is not the same size as your waist. It's going to be smaller, or it's not the same size as the circumference where it's going to go around. It's going to be smaller than that, depending on how you want it to fit, by like a couple inches or so. So that's like, I didn't even size this, but like as you can see, oh sorry, I walked the wrong way. This is actually only about an inch smaller than my actual measurement, so I actually probably won't even use that long. I might shorten it a little bit, but it's not hard. Like you can excuse me, you can put it through, you can sew it, try on your pants. If they're too loose, you can then cut off the portion you sewed, pull back together, sew it again, and then that'll shrink it by like an inch or two right there, and then you can try it on again and just keep doing that until you get the fit that you want. But here are the pants. They're huge but that's okay. It's going to have a gathered waist, so that'll be good, and they're not really supposed to be tight fitting. These are not the color of Freya's pants, so I like the texture on it. I think the texture is really good. I'll have to mess up the ends because hers are kind of frayed and junky, and then I'll probably just use my airbrush and weather them a little bit lighter than they currently are. So I'll weather them with like some grays and whites and stuff, and perhaps I'll stream that, who knows. So I will likely stream again next week on Tuesday at 1 p.m. excuse me, Eastern Standard Time. I have no idea what I'm going to be streaming, so I will think about that through the week. I'll probably post it in my stories on Instagram, and I'll post it on Tuesday before the stream what the stream's going to be about. But it will be a tutorial stream, and it'll be a tutorial on something I'm making for either Freya, or I want to do some updates to my cable cosplay, so maybe it'll be that. Like, I really want to remake the arms, so maybe I could do that on live stream. And I also want to upgrade the gun. Like, there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of things I could do. I just don't know what I'm going to be doing next week. So I will let you guys know at the latest Tuesday before the stream what the tutorial stream will be about. So I hope to see you guys next time.